Welcome everybody to what is session 23 in this series, a quarterly series called Philosophers in the Midst of History, which we've been doing here at the Frank Weinberg Library since 2016. We had to take a hiatus when you all remember the COVID lockdown and we couldn't do anything. And then we came back and started doing these again. And this is like I said, a quarterly series, so we'll have a session each year in February, May, August, and then November, like we're doing here. And this is a little bit out of sequence because usually what we do is an ancient philosopher in the spring, and then a medieval philosopher in May, and then an early modern philosopher in August, and then we wrap up the year with somebody from like the 19th or 20th century in November. Now, David Hume almost made it to the 19th century, but didn't quite get there. He was about a little under 25 years short. So we're doing him in part because August I got sick, so I couldn't be here for that, so we had to cancel that one. So we're doing that one. We've already got some authors picked out for next year. I'm looking at doing Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, Peter Abelard, who's a great early medieval figure, well, really mid-medieval figure. Immanuel Kant, great 18th, 19th century, mostly 18th century. And then Iris Murdoch, who we were planning on doing this year, but we didn't get to. Come on in. So what we do in this series is I talk for a while. There's time for Q&A, not just at the end, but at different points. And you can ask questions at any time if you want to. I can always get us back onto track. It's sort of like what the title suggests. We're looking at the philosophers and their ideas, but within a historical context. So how are they shaped by the history that they were involved in? What role did they have in it? What effects, what influence did they have afterwards? And, as it turns out with David Hume, I mean, you could say that in our present day, he's very influential in the world of ideas, but not quite so much, say, in the world of politics or economics. But he actually was quite important in his own time and a little bit afterwards for those sorts of things. So we'll talk about that briefly. And as you notice, we record these. If you want to, you can go and check out all the earlier ones. They're available on YouTube in my channel, Gregory B. Sadler. And they actually interestingly get a good bit of views. I think the one that has the least views, it's about 1,700 or so. Some of them have been viewed like 20,000 times. So we get a lot of mileage out of this. If that makes you reticent at all about asking questions, nobody's going to know who you are. So you don't have to worry about that. And as teachers often say, there's no dumb questions. I don't assume anybody has like a background in this. So if you've got a question, you can ask away, and I will certainly be happy to answer it. So this guy, David Hume, how many of you have heard of him before? Okay, so about half of you. He's somebody who we still teach a lot in philosophy classes. And in a few other things, maybe if you take a class in aesthetics, you might read some of his essays. We don't really teach him much in other things, although he was pretty important in his own time. And he was not just a philosopher. I mean, he actually wasn't really that well known in his lifetime as a philosopher. He was better known as a historian. He wrote a 6-volume history of England that we'll talk about in a bit. He also was a literary essayist, what we nowadays would call like a literary critic or a theorist. And that's where he actually made his reputation and made his money, more importantly. That's how he stayed afloat. His first main philosophy book, as he said, fell stillborn from the press. He was very disappointed with this. Now we actually recognize this as a work of genius, but not a lot of people wanted to buy it. And back then, you didn't go to a publisher generally and have them like give you an advance or something. You went to a publisher and said, how much is it going to cost me to get 40 copies or 500 copies of this bound, ready to sell in bookstores? You had to be kind of entrepreneurial. So, like quite a few authors in our own time, he was left with quite a few extra copies for a while. He's from Scotland, and nowadays we often think of Scotland as this kind of quaint place north of England that has beautiful vistas, and we think about Braveheart, which is very anachronistic. But in his time, Scotland was, in some respects, the place to be. There was a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. It had recently become part of the United Kingdom, which now includes 4 kingdoms. That took a while to bring together, and that only happened in 1707. And Hume is born in 1711, so it's kind of a new thing for him. And there's all these conflicts and wars going on throughout the course of his lifetime. And they're between major and minor powers in Europe. The Spanish were still a significant power at the time. The French, of course. England combined with Scotland, although sometimes Scotland tried to, separate in ways that we'll talk about in a bit. Austria, the Netherlands, even Sweden was kind of a dominant power at the time, although going into eclipse. And they were fighting not just in Europe, but sometimes in the Americas, or over in India, or in other places, fighting for trade, fighting for religion, fighting for prestige. And that's kind of the backdrop. Italy, Germany, not unified countries at the time. As a matter of fact, just a whole bunch of little scattered states, although Germany is kind of a powerhouse by then in terms of intellectual matters, as we'll talk about. And there's a lot of major transformations that are happening in the society that Hume is living in, not as quickly as in our time, right? I mean, if you think about just our last decade and the amazing technological transformations that we've seen, that's pretty striking. But, all sorts of other matters that are happening. What we nowadays call industrial society, capitalism, is developing, replacing earlier forms of economic exchange and accumulation. And Scotland is one of the places where a lot of this stuff is happening. As a matter of fact, Edinburgh is the center of what we call the Scottish Enlightenment. And Hume was actually one of the not founding members, but a good part of that. And so that's part of the culture that he's involved in. The Enlightenment is also going on in the other parts of England, in France, where it's called the Siècle de Lumière, in Germany, where it's called the Aufklärung. All of these are names for this interesting set of developments that are taking place. And it's part of what gets called eventually the Republic of Letters. So, we think about our current society and how, if you want to, you can go online and find out about David Hume or anybody else. You can find videos and podcast episodes and people teaching classes and encyclopedia articles, and that's really awesome, right? And we have this wonderful road network that got us all here today that we often just take for granted. We were talking about, how is traffic on 43? It sucks, and there's these bottlenecks. And, if you think about it, there's nothing for us to complain about. It's amazing. We're living in the future. David Hume was living, 2 centuries earlier, almost, 2.5 centuries earlier, but they knew what each other were thinking, not because they had telepathy or anything, but because they would write letters to each other. And the letters would actually get to the places they were supposed to go, and they could copy them. And not only did they have letters, they had salons where you might go, David Hume participated in the salon culture in Paris when he was there. And they had, publishers, and the publishers are not just publishing books, journals. You could read about the latest research, not just in philosophy, but in science. And you could probably, if you were educated enough, follow it and figure out what these people were talking about. And if you thought that they were wrong, well, you write them a letter. And you say, here's where I think your experiment went awry, or here's how your philosophy is off base. And then they would write you a letter back. Sometimes the letter might be, screw off, I'm not interested in talking with you. But very often it would be, oh, thank you for pointing out these problems. Let me see if I can address them. And this is part of the culture. Obviously, it didn't have the sort of rapidity that we have now with email, right? Where you can you can easily contact somebody at any time you want to. But, it was a real improvement over previous times. And again, Hume is part of that. So he's getting to be a member of the world of ideas, which is a world that has important effects within politics, within culture, within religion, and society. So I've given you a timeline that might be helpful for you. It's got when his major works were published, the things that he's doing in his life. And so I thought I'd sort of run through that. And it also tells you about what other people were doing. That's of interest. It helps us sort of situate him in the history that he's living in. Some of these are literary figures. So you notice the year that he's born, Alexander Pope publishes this essay on criticism, a very important work for aesthetics. And you've got some political things as well, kings dying, being replaced by other monarchs, various wars taking place, and all of that. So Hume is born in 1711 in Edinburgh. He's actually born as David Hume. Hume is not his original name. He's going to change that a little bit later on. And, like a lot of kids at the time, there wasn't like a public school system that you would go to, so you'd learn things at home. They could hire tutors for you. But eventually, when 1723, and he's pretty young, 12 years old at the time, he starts taking classes at the University of Edinburgh. And taking classes, for us, when we think about going to college, it's a very structured process, right? You got to apply, and then you get in, and then they want your money, and then what else happens? You got to go to the registrar, or you do it online nowadays. What classes am I going to take? Your advisor, back when I was doing it, had to sign a card. Now it's just like a checkbox or something like that. And you couldn't just wander in and sit in people's classes. Things were a little less regulated back then. So long as you weren't really causing trouble and you could pay when you were supposed to, you seemed like you understood what you were doing, they'd let you learn things. And so he ends up leaving in 1726 without earning a degree. He's got what he wanted out of it, and he decides to start studying law. And a little bit later on in 1729, he's going to go through let's call it an existential crisis. That's as good a name as any. He experiences a depression, and this depression turns him away from business or pleasure. He decides that he really wants to buckle down and start studying, and he devotes himself to just months and months of this. It helps him get out of his funk. And eventually he's going to change his last name to Hume. He's going to try his hand as an apprentice to a sugar merchant. That doesn't work out particularly well. Hume was never really great in the world of business, as many people turn out not to be, including many business people. Most businesses fail. It was the case back then, just as it is now. And he decides that he wants to start writing. And so the first thing that he's going to work on, the first main work, is this, the Treatise of Human Nature. And you can tell, looking at it, It's a big book, right? It's divided into 3 parts. The first part is about our ideas, where we get them from. This is what we call epistemology in philosophy, right? There's a bit of metaphysics involved there as well. The second whole part of it is on the passions, what we typically nowadays call emotions. How do they work? So it's psychology, right? And then the third part is social theory. It's about the virtues and justice. How do they actually work? He's developing an ethics that he's putting forward. And it is entirely unsuccessful. He makes very little impact. He gets quite discouraged by this, but he does bounce back. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. And then, so here's a contemporary version of the thing that will actually get him a lot of attention. Essays, moral, political, and literary. And the big thick book as well. He's been writing essays on a variety of topics. This is actually a special version that has the essays that were unpublished, or as we say, withdrawn. Right? They were going to go to the publisher, and then somebody was going to raise a stink about it, and he's like, maybe I better not publish this. But he's got a lot of other ones in here, ranging over a ton of topics. Some are political, some are aesthetic, some are about different philosophers and why they get things wrong, some are about matters of religion. And so, once he publishes that sort of puts him on the map. And he tries to become a university professor. Actually 2 times. First at Edinburgh and then at Glasgow. And at Edinburgh, he runs into a real snag. There's a lot of people who are, looking forward to him being a good candidate, but he has a reputation at the time, perhaps deserved, for being an atheist. And that was enough to get you not kicked out of a job, that's the wrong way, because he never got into the job. That was enough to get you excluded from being considered. There was actually a local preacher who, went to some of the decision makers and he's like, you better not let this person into the university. Similar problem happened with Glasgow. He had this reputation, in part from his essays, for not being, not only not being an Orthodox Christian, but actually being at the other extreme. Being an atheist, which he probably was. If you look at his writings on religion, he usually played these things kind of close to the chest, as we say. So he doesn't get that. He works as a tutor, publishes some other things, and then so he's not good in business, but he is good in political affairs. He hooks up with this guy. General James St. Clair, and they go on an expedition to Brittany, which is, in northern France, and it's a military expedition. Doesn't accomplish anything the way most typically, turn out, but he has a great time along the way and learns something about, military life. And then he accompanies St. Clair as a part of an embassy to Vienna and to Turin. So now he's getting to travel around. And the best way to travel, somebody else's dime, right? So he's doing that sort of thing. He doesn't have an expense account, of course, but he's getting to travel in somebody's entourage. And then he comes back to Scotland and moves to Edinburgh, lives with his sister Catherine, and he takes this book, Treatise on Human Nature, and he's like, I wonder if I can do something with this. And what he ends up doing is taking the first book of it, the first part of it, and turning that into something called the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. So he repurposes his content, if we want to talk in internet terms, right? And then later on, he's going to do the same thing with book 3. He's going to repurpose that as his favorite of his works, the Inquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals, and that's in 1751. He begins writing what I actually think is one of his most brilliant works, the Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. This is one that we often have undergraduates reading, like in Intro to Philosophy classes, but he doesn't publish it. It's not going to get published until he's dead, because it's arguing against a lot of the ideas and arguments that traditional religious people have at the time. And so we'll talk about that in a bit. He does get some recognition. Like I put in here, he's elected secretary of the Philosophy Society. That's kind of a good honor. He's also elected as keeper of the Advocates' Library. Now, advocates are lawyers. So, he's straying over into other fields. Philosophy, law, politics, economics, they weren't all totally separate departments at that time. Hume is kind of, he's not living in the Renaissance, but he's kind of a Renaissance man in that respect. He'll resign as the keeper because there's a little tiff over expelled books. Now, you might say, well, how the hell do you expel a book? Well, you get rid of it, right? Instead of an expelled student, the books are to blame. Get rid of those. And he doesn't like that idea, so he resigns. He will also be one of the founders of the, where do I have this? The Select Society of Edinburgh. So the Select Society, I guess, reading about it, it's sort of like, I'm blanking on the name, it's for public speaking, Toastmasters, right? Learning how to speak well, learning how to debate, all that sort of stuff. So Hume is one of the founding members, and within a year they've got 80 different members, and they're all, arguing with each other about different things and having a great time doing it. And it's founded to make you a better arguer, a better orator, a better debater. And then he begins publishing in 1754 something that's going to make him a lot of money and give him the reputation that he has in the 18th century, his History of England. And now if you notice the dates and the numbers, it's not published in the order that we would expect. Volume 5, what's going to become Volume 5, gets published first. And then Volume 6. And then he goes back to the other ones. And these are incredibly popular. They sell quite well. Some people are like, oh, this is bad history, but Hume is doing something a bit new with the work that he's doing. So this just cements his reputation. 1763, he gets to go to Paris, and Paris was the place to be besides Edinburgh at the time. Intellectual center. He gets invited to the salons. He gets to chat with the ladies and flirt and stuff like that. Never really gets involved with any of them. But he has a great time. Hume was known as kind of a bon vivant, as the kind of person you'd want at a party. And in France, he meets a guy who we've actually done a session on, who is brilliant but a real jerk. And like a jerk, not just in one way, but like kind of across the spectrum. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Rousseau is a very important philosopher from Hume's time. You could say he's French. He writes in French. He's actually Swiss. But Rousseau, he really has a knack for ticking people off. And he was kind of a jerk in his personal life, too. He didn't take care of any of his kids. He had, weird predilections. He had all sorts of ideas that he'd write down. And he got in trouble with the French political establishment. They actually put a arrest warrant out for him. And so he is going to bring Rousseau to England. And Hume is a really nice guy, So for Rousseau to get to the point where Hume is like, all right, buddy, you got to get the hell out of here. I can't even put up with you. Rousseau was pretty bad. He was not a good guest. And then he and Hume both published things about why their very public friendship broke up. Rousseau is telling his side, Hume is telling his side. And then, after that, Hume is appointed Undersecretary of State for the Northern Department. So he gets a government job. And according to him, at that time, this gave him an inside look into how government was actually working in the United Kingdom. And, how was it working? Not particularly well. So, the sort of things that you see if you actually do participate, not just in local government, where all sorts of petty personal conflicts can happen, but in national government, right? And this is, getting towards the end of his life. He returns to Edinburgh in 1769. In 1772, he starts to have health problems. By middle age, he was seriously overweight. Back then, their diets weren't great. It was common to have gout and things like that. Hume, is not doing well. He ends up having, we're not exactly sure what happened. It's called disorders in his bowels, something abdominal that's not working right. Maybe today they would have diagnosed him and given him some pills or, suggested a regime of exercise or something. But back then, there's not a lot you can do with it. And he will die in 1776 of abdominal cancer. And he has to be interned in a simple Roman tomb. James Boswell, who he'd fallen out with, who's another major writer of the time, actually a student of Adam Smith, who Hume had been friends with, is there in attendance and writes about that. And then you notice after he dies, he still gets to publish things. As a matter of fact, he has to publish those after he dies. Because if he published them during his lifetime, it probably would have caused trouble for him. So, essays on suicide and the immortality of the soul. Hume, he's not advocating everybody should kill themselves, but he's considering this question, is there ever a situation in which a human being could kill themselves and it could be legitimate? That was supposed to go into one of his books before, but that was one of the ones where his friends were like, oh, buddy, if you publish this, your career is over, so maybe hold off on it. The one on the immortality of the soul, Hume doesn't think that the soul is immortal. There's no good arguments for it. So again, if you say something like that in a country where people have just been fighting each other over which interpretation of Christianity is the right one, you're probably going to get yourself in some trouble. And then finally, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, published in 1779. And that sort of completes not just his life, but you could say his legacy within and close to his lifetime. So it's kind of a great loss. You notice that he's able to see the American Revolution happening. Hume actually thought the revolutionists had a good beef with the home country, and he suggested making peace with them. He's going to be influential on some of the people we call founding fathers, because he's an important, British thinker at the time. James Madison is influenced by him. Thomas Jefferson is influenced the other way. He thinks Hume is a terrible guy. Don't be like Hume. But he also had a friendship with Benjamin Franklin. He hosted him at one time. So he's got a lot of interesting connections. So let's take a little pause here before we go into what were his ideas? What was the stuff he actually wrote about? Any things you want to ask about or clarifications at this time? Yeah.
Out of curiosity, he was at Edinburgh at the age of 12.
Yeah.
And what languages was he studying? Very many people knew Greek and Latin at that time. Did a 12-year-old do that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it depends on the kind of family you come from, right? So, this is a couple generations later. John Stuart Mill, when he is just he wasn't a toddler. He would have been a young child. He learns Greek and Latin well enough to actually tutor his younger siblings in it. So, you start out a kid who's smart early enough and give them the right kind of encouragement, and they can learn quite a bit. And yeah, those are it's an interesting thing that Greek, useful, not as useful as it will become later on. Latin was still sort of the lingua franca for learned life in Europe in the 18th century. In ways that we often say, it was a dead language. No, they weren't using it for day-to-day life, obviously, right? But a lot of works were written in Latin. Now, this is an earlier century. Descartes' Meditations, not written in French, written in Latin by René Descartes, and then he had somebody else, even though he spoke French, translated into French. He, again, earlier century, Descartes writes the Discourse on Method in French, specifically so that women and servants will be able to read it. Because the assumption is, if you're an educated person, you know Latin, right? So, yeah, that's, you would learn things. Hume was a smart guy, If you think, this is a total side note, if you think about the way that we do education today, for the most part, we cater to like the kids in the middle, The kids who are really smart, sometimes we have like gifted, talented programs for that, but we don't want them to jump ahead too far because of these socialization concerns. Not an issue back then. If you were smart enough to go and jump in, they'd let you do it, But if you screwed up, then they'd boot you out. So the proof that you could do it was you would actually do it, Any other questions? Yeah. Okay.
You said he kind of had this falling out with his family, parents early on?
No.
No? Or he left them?
No.
So who were the influencers in his life?
Oh, you mean like personal?
Well, personal, his beliefs,
Oh.
And then at the end, who actually who got his stuff published? Because he obviously was dead.
Oh, afterwards.
Who were his influencers?
Yeah.
In his life? And then when he died.
We can talk about like intellectual influences, and I'm going to get to that in a bit. It doesn't appear like his family made huge impressions on him, He had a decent enough upbringing and family life, and then he just kind of moves on. He's close to his sister and his brother in the course of his life, but that's more of a relation of equals more than anything else. And, his great ambition is to be a famous writer. So there's plenty of other people that he can kind of model himself after, that he can look to and be like, I want to be like that person. I want to be successful like that person. But there's nobody who like takes Hume under his wing and is like, Hume is his protege or something like that. But he did do stuff like that to a limited extent with other people. Like Adam Smith is younger than him, but Smith is very much influenced by Hume. Smith is also more successful in that he's able to become a professor. But so in terms of intellectual influence, Cicero is massively important. The Roman writer and orator. He's in this tradition that we call empiricism. So this is actually a good jumping off point to talk about like his intellectual life. We often in philosophy, like we're doing an intro class or we have a textbook, we say that in the modern period, there were the British empiricists and then there were the continental rationalists, and they disagreed about important things, and they were like parts of a tradition. And so the empiricists would include early on people like Hobbes and Bacon, and then John Locke and George Berkeley, and a few other people along the way. And then the continental rationalists, René Descartes, Benedict Spinoza, Nikolai Malebranche, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and others like that. But that's kind of a distorted picture, because the empiricists, so they're all about like, let's get experience, let's find out how the world works, let's pay attention to how our ideas are put together. All of it's coming from experience. They weren't really all like that. Locke has got rationalist ideas. They all kind of mix and match. And the rationalists are only part of what's going on in France and Germany and Italy and places like that. So there were followers of John Locke in France. Condorcet is a good example of that. There's a lot of outliers who don't quite fit in there. And they're all part of this thing that we can call the Enlightenment. And so they're arguing with each other about important things. Hume is against having too much faith in human reason, you could say. So he's against a kind of superficial rationalism that says all we got to do is like think by ourselves and we'll figure out all the problems, right? Hume thinks we actually need to look at things in the world, but so do all the good rationalists as well. And one of the things that he does that's kind of striking in his works, but this is also typical of his time, is he often writes in the first person, right? And he'll say, I scrutinize my own thoughts and feelings, and here's what I actually find. Maybe you find other stuff, but here's what I've got, so that's what's going into my book or my essays. If you find something else, you let me know, I can only go by what it is that I myself actually know. But this is, again, something that all sorts of other authors are doing. And I guess the other thing that's important to keep in mind about him, going to this issue of influence, is he doesn't belong to a school, in the sense of like belonging to a tradition that you're like, well, these are the things we have to believe if we're going to be a Cartesian follower of René Descartes, or we're going to be a Spinozian, which would get you in trouble, by the way, being a Spinozian back then. He's a skeptic. And Cicero, who I mentioned was a big influence, Cicero was also a skeptic. But they're not skeptics of the sort, the extreme ones, who are like, we can't know anything. Nobody can know anything. Hume is more like, there's a lot of different ways of looking at things. How do we know which one is actually correct? Let's do our best, try to figure it out. We'll play the arguments off against each other. We might not be able to arrive at a definite conclusion that we know to be the case, but let's do our best with it. And once we get as far as we can take these things, that's as far as we're going to go. That's all that we actually get. And that's what you find in his treatise, and that's what you find in his other works. He doesn't belong to a school as such. He has massive effects on other people, but I guess you could say that he's more influenced by what he judiciously accepts bit by bit from people, rather than like taking out an entire program from somebody and saying, I'm going to be like this person. So in a way, he kind of cobbles together a whole philosophy, rather than taking it from somebody else, which is kind of a cool thing to do. I hadn't really thought of him that way, but yeah. A few key ideas about his works. Why was he so important, right? So sometimes we can line these up with famous quips or quotes, which, as those things tend to be, are a little bit misleading. So one of them that you might have heard of, tell me if you have, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. Is that a familiar line to any of you? Hume said it. He said it in this first book, the treatise, right? He doesn't mean it like in the sense that, well, you can't ever think about anything and you just ought to feel, right? Because, he's actually using reason to figure out how we work, how the human mind ticks, how the emotions work, and how we should guide them. But what he's really suspicious of are people who have all the answers figured out in advance. And, when you ask them, well, what's your basis for that? They're like, reason. I just thought it out. I figured it out myself. Hume is like, that's not going to work. Just as much as like, if any of you ever been on like a diet or an exercise program, you're going to try to change your physical health. Maybe you had to give up smoking or something like that. How do you motivate yourself? You can't just like say, well, I know this is the right thing for me to do. Everything falls into place, right? I mean, you can try that, feel free, but it doesn't work because you need some sort of emotional motivation, some passional motivation for that, right? So why do why do I exercise? In part because I don't want to get any fatter than I am right now, and I'm getting older, and I do want to make sure that my bones don't get brittle. And I would like to, my kids are too old and too big now to like ride on my shoulders or stuff like that. That used to be something I'd be like, so I can carry my kids around. But I'd like to, if we, have something going on at home, I'd like to be able to pick up heavy boxes and move them from place to place to not be dependent, right? Those are emotional reasons that aren't directly tied to, pure logical, Spock-like, reason that has no emotions involved. That's part of what Hume is saying. If we want to think about how we ought to live our life, we need to think about what do we actually feel and whether we're feeling the right things. In ethics, he is an advocate of what we call moral sentimentalism, which means that we do take our feelings into consideration. And one of the most important feelings is what he calls sympathy. And by this, sometimes people get really precious and technical about it. Well, there's empathy, there's compassion, there's sympathy, there's, all these things. They're not the same thing. Well, they are the same thing for Hume, right? Because nobody is making those distinctions back then. The term sympathy means being able to feel what other people are feeling or imagine ourselves in their place and feel bad when you see somebody walking along and tripping and smacking their face on the floor or, losing the purse of coins that they have or getting beaten up, and that can motivate you to do the right thing. And he thinks that ethics really ought to be based in large part on this feeling of sympathy for other humans and maybe even animals to some degree. He doesn't like people who are very, as he puts it, enthusiastic, meaning that they take a very hard position on things and are willing to go to war over it, over matters of religion or politics. He likes people who are kind of middle of the road, who can get along with other people. He doesn't like factionalism. He also, so those are, sort of things having to do with ethics. Interestingly, he will claim, and this goes back to that first-person perspective thing, he says, when I look inside of myself, I don't find anything that I can call myself, something that is permanent, something that is the core of who I am. All I find are a bunch of different things, a bunch of memories, a bunch of impressions, a bunch of habits, all of these things connected together. And that's me. That's the David Hume I know myself as. But there's no little core, no substance that I can find inside of myself. And I don't think, and this is him, I don't think any of the rest of you can do that either. If you can, show it to me. Now, obviously, you can't show that to anybody else, right? And so this is a really important position that he's taking. And a lot of people in philosophy and even in ordinary life, they look at Hume and they're like, yeah, maybe we don't actually have a self. There was some conjecture about, did he get this from Western interpretations of Buddhism, which were starting to trickle into Europe at the time? The answer is, we don't know. Probably not. He seems to have come up with this independently. There were some scholars who were writing about that. We have no evidence that Hume actually read any of them, so we don't know one way or the other. Yeah.
He talks about searching for his core.
Yeah.
Did he spell out what that core was?
He thinks there isn't one.
Excuse me?
He thinks there isn't one. So he can't spell it out.
Well, he's searching for a core. He must have an idea.
No. He says, there's nothing that I can find that corresponds to a lasting, permanent, and I'm using the word core. He doesn't use the word core.
Okay.
I'm just paraphrasing. He's saying, people talk about having a soul, or, Rene Descartes talks about his mind being what he is. I don't find that in me, All I find when I look within are what I ate for dinner and, what I'm thinking about doing next and, some memories from when I was a kid. And I don't find any single thing that is a unity.
Could his belief have any reason with it?
What's that?
Could his belief have any impact on that reasoning? Because Descartes had the belief.
He says Descartes' wrong.
Excuse me?
He's saying Descartes' wrong, that Descartes misled himself, And this is where maybe Descartes' right and Hume is wrong, But he thinks that everybody's fooling themselves if they think there is a permanent locus of identity that we have. And this is where when you look at philosophers, sometimes you got to go this way or you got to go that way, So, yeah. I mean, I tend to think that some of these things, some of these problems. Like he also talks about free will too. Do we have free will or do we not have free will? You always get asked, well, what do they mean by this term, right? Does it mean that we, like with free will, do we make choices? Obviously we do, right? Do we waver between alternatives? Sure. Can there be factors that influence us? Yeah. But there's also like a little wiggle room that we have. If you want to call free will that, then Hume's like, sure, then you got free will. But if you mean like this capacity to choose in every circumstance what you want to do without being influenced by other things or throwing that influence aside, then, you know, not even people who advocate for free will believe in that, you know. So, yeah.
When you say he didn't have a core,
No, he doesn't think that we have
I
a.
doesn't think we have a core.
Yeah.
How, I'm trying to reconcile that with the fact that yet he wrote essays on morality.
Sure. Yeah, you could not have a lasting, permanent core that is the crux of who you are, and then all the other stuff is just like extra, and have moral sentiments and ideas about right and wrong. I mean, you don't have to be the same person that you were when you were 6, and you can still have moral beliefs. You
I
know.
always kind of associated, you know, your moral beliefs with something core.
Oh, well, we're using core in 2 different ways then, right? Core, the way you're using it, means important to you, right? I'm talking about having something like a soul that would remain the same no matter what across the course of your life and perhaps beyond it. Hume doesn't think we have that. But you could be, as he calls it, a bundle of sensations and memories and impressions. And some of those could be about moral life. Like you could have the impression, somebody did me the wrong thing yesterday. Well, you might change that later on. You might, come to say, oh, I was wrong about that. But that doesn't mean that you don't have beliefs about morality, you know?
See, I think that morality evolves from what is core in the sense that
You're using core in a different way than Hume is. So, yeah. You mean about things that are important to us.
well, that whatever your beliefs, your morals,
Yeah.
It's not a function of importance, but they rise up out of.
Well, some of them do, some of them don't. I mean, as children, we learn all sorts of moral lessons that we don't actually like and we're just kind of stuck with. That's part of our moral development, right? That's not core to us, but it can become core in the sense of being important because we're like, well, I better behave or I'm going to get punished, and I don't like that. So I need to learn what counts as being a good person in this society. It doesn't arise spontaneously out of some wonderful center of ourselves. Children typically are kind of jerks, and need to be civilized. But Hume thinks that older people are like that too. That there is no one single thing that I can call myself. I am a whole bunch of things, and no one single one of them is the thing that I am. But you can still have moral ideas and behave morally, even if that's the case. It gets weirder yet. The biggest thing that he's known for, and that's one of the handouts that I gave you, Hume says that our notion of cause and effect, which is absolutely necessary for having science, metaphysics, these sorts of things, it's not real. It doesn't mean that things don't happen, but there is no such thing as like causality, where this thing makes this thing happen over here. All we actually observe when we're paying attention is constant conjunction. This thing happens, we associate them together. Why do we do that? Association of ideas. It's part of our psychology. We develop something that he calls custom, which is like a sort of big habit. And so then we're like, the fire, I see the fire, I see the smoke, the fire is causing the smoke. No, all we actually observe are the two things. And it's the same with like internal sensations. I have a thought, that thought should lead to this thought. Well, it's just because we've connected them up in this way. That's part of what our culture has done. Now, if you buy into this, you might say, well, holy crap, then I can't trust anything. Hume says, no, don't worry about that. Because we do have all these regular patterns that happen, right? It's just that they're not 100%, you know? You can't be 100% a priori, clear about anything in advance when it comes to cause and effect. You can just say, well, these are the ways things typically happen. And that's the way that we actually do treat things in real life. Think about medicine. If you ever get surgery, one of the things they have you sign says that I understand that medicine is not an exact science, that things could go crazy, that, maybe this thing is going to be, what the doctor does, but it could lead to very different effects. It probably won't, but it could. You never know, right? And Hume thinks that that's what our whole notion of like power, cause and effect, all the things that we use. I mean, think about our technology that relies on hard notions that this thing will happen if this thing happens. Yeah, our technology fails all the time in weird, unpredictable ways. We're lucky we have the regularity in life that we actually do. We don't need to have it be 100% in order to live. And he talks about you can sit in your study and think these thoughts and realize as a philosopher that, these are a little troubling. But then you go out with your friends and he would say, play billiards, shoot pool, right? And you don't suddenly worry about whether you hit the ball, it's going to float off into the sky or something. You think it's going to go and hit that thing. What's your basis for that? You've observed that sort of thing happening all sorts of times before. Now, things that we don't know anything about, we can make up all sorts of imaginary scenarios about them, but we don't really know how they'll work until we try them out. So, again, this is not something you necessarily need to believe, but this is what Hume thought, and this winds up being what a lot of other people buy into from him. Now, weirdly, and in contradiction to that, he tells us that what we can count on is human nature being the same across every culture, not only in his time, but he says, actually going back to the Greek-Latin thing, right? He says, if we want to know about what ancient Romans and Greeks were like, we just need to look at English people and French people of our own time, because they're basically all the same. And then he, this isn't something he could actually have good basis for saying, and it's contradicted by another essay that he has, which is called On National Characters, where he's saying, French, how comedians will be like, these people are like this, these people are like this. So he's saying, French people are like this, typically, not all of them, but a lot of them. English people are more like this, like the English are the most courageous. And he attributes that weirdly to being carnivorous, Now, so sometimes you see stuff that Hume says and you're like, he should have known that this is a garbage argument, even himself. Why is he putting this out there? And, not everybody hits 100, or what is it, bats 1,000 among all the philosophers. But, he's got some interesting ideas. One of the things that he does say, though, is that he, we often say, what is the human being? How do we define it? We're an animal, but what kind? A rational animal, right? So that's how we're fundamentally different from what he calls the brutes, meaning all the other stupid animals. Hume doesn't buy that. He actually says, dogs, donkeys, they actually reason, just not as well as we do. And they don't use the kind of language that we do. But you can watch an animal and you can see it doing problem solving. Now, some are stupid, even among smart animals. So, think about the ones that we think are super smart, like crows and elephants and apes and cetaceans like whales and dolphins. There's bound to be a few dummies in there, mixed into them, right? But for the most part, you can watch, even your cat, you can watch your cat trying to figure out how to open the door. That means that animals reason. Not as well as us, but, we're not radically different from them. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Just I want to be aware of time. I mentioned that he talks, about religious topics. So Hume thought, and then he's actually got a piece about miracles that he, by the way, he left out of the treatise. He called it castrating his own work. And the reason he did it is because he knew he'd get in trouble. And he'd get in trouble with a guy who was particularly important in British intellectual life at the time, Bishop Butler. And so Hume, it didn't do any good. Bishop Butler and others weren't interested in this work anyway. But later on, in the inquiry concerning human understanding, he will make a really interesting discussion of miracles. And part of his argument is, it's not as if miracles couldn't happen. We just don't have any good reason to think they ever do. Because all of the reasons for that would be based on testimony, and testimony about things going weird, going unusually astray, has to be really, really good testimony. And where are we going to get that? We don't know these people. Think about the gospel writers, the apostles, or their secretaries, like Mark, secretary to Peter, writing stuff down. He's like, that was, centuries ago. None of us know these people. Why would we automatically believe that they're not mixed up or, they're actually telling the truth? And, boy, if that had been published back then, he wouldn't have ever gotten anybody to listen to him. And he got in quite a bit of trouble, even having it published within his lifetime. The dialogues concerning natural religion go even further. And here, so I mentioned, we were talking about Cicero before, right? Cicero, who Hume really, really likes, has a book called On the Nature of the Gods. And Cicero's writing back in ancient Roman times, right? He's prior to Christianity coming on the scene. He is actually there at the breakup of the Roman Republic and the transformation into an empire under Julius Caesar, who Cicero fought against in a civil war. And Cicero has an Epicurean philosopher, a Stoic philosopher, and a skeptic philosopher who happens to be a priest in the Roman religion, but doesn't believe in any of this stuff, presenting their points of view. And Cicero doesn't endorse any of them, but he lets them fight with each other. Hume does the same thing in the dialogues concerning natural religion. He has 3 different Christians, and each of them proves how the other Christian has things wrong. And when you do that, the sum total is they're all wrong. None of them have the right conception of God. None of them can prove anything that they assert. And so it's very subversive. It's a very interesting strategy that he's quite deliberately pursuing. And, you can understand why he had to publish it posthumously, given the religious context of the time, because the effect of it is to say, all of these arguments trying to prove the existence of God, not a single one of them work. But you let a Christian demolish the other Christian's argument and say, oh, I've got a better proof than you. And then the other guy gets to say, oh, your proof sucks too, And then the grand total is, well, they all suck. None of them work, right? He also says we really can't know anything about the nature of God. For all we, if we look at the world and we're like, oh, what a wonderful world this is, it's amazing. Hume says, you don't know that there's an intelligent designer. It might be a senile designer. For all you know, this was the product of a God who was good at one point in time, but then, he's not up to snuff anymore. Or it could be a whole committee of gods who made this world. That's just as plausible as any other narrative. Or it could be something like a giant spider spinning, the world out of its spinnerets. We could imagine whatever we want. And Hume says any of these is just as likely as the other one, because we're off way beyond the realm of our experience and what we understand on the basis of our experience. So, those are his ideas in terms of religion. I think you can kind of piece together that Hume doesn't believe in any of this stuff. He's an atheist, but he had to keep that under wraps. So those are some of his major ideas. Not all of them, obviously, but let's take a little pause here for more questions, and then I'll tell you about what his effects on history were, which we should do as philosophers in the midst of history. So any questions, clarifications? Yeah.
What attracted him in the first place to Rousseau?
Oh,
What did they share in common?
I mean, as it turned out, what do they share in common? Not a hell of a lot, But it's one of those kind of things where you think you have more in common with somebody when you're on good terms with them, and then as you get to know them better, you realize just how little you actually do have in common with them. Rousseau was highly paranoid. And it's one of those things where, you know the old expression, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. They were out to get Rousseau, right? But he was a drama creator. And Hume doesn't like drama. He likes things to be nice, calm, easy, settled. Rousseau was one of those people who was like continually generating conflict and problems. And I guess Hume, at first, I mean, he saw that Rousseau was being persecuted, and he didn't realize that Rousseau was being persecuted partly because Rousseau was a jerk, and brought some of this upon himself. And so, he invites him back to England to keep him safe. That was part of the motivation because there were, arrest warrants out for Rousseau. And then Rousseau just acted like such a jerk that Hume eventually had to be like, you got to get out of here, buddy. But I mean, what do they have in common? They're both smart, right? They are both, at least on the surface, committed to the ideals of the Enlightenment, but they have very different interpretations of what that looks like, as it turns out. I mean, you really get to know a person well when you live with them. So, hopefully all of your house guests are better than Rousseau, but yeah. And it was funny because once their friendship broke down, Rousseau was a jerk in the Republic of Letters to him too, So Hume actually didn't want to, but he had to publish something like presenting his own side, like we would do in social media today, Yeah.
Do you know why he changed his name?
Oh, it wasn't a really big deal. Changing your name, yeah, it was so. The pronunciation, as far as I understand this, the pronunciation of home wasn't what we would say home. It was closer to Hume, right? And so people were essentially misspelling his name. So we'll just change it because he actually runs into another guy later on who does have the name Home. He corresponds with him briefly, but it was kind of a minor point. And this is a bit off topic. Orthography, spelling, was not standardized in English at the time. Part of what actually does contribute to that. So one of the things that I have here in the timeline is, where is this? So one of the people, Boswell, publishes this dictionary of the English language, right? And what does a dictionary do? I mean, we think of a dictionary as the thing you go to find out the definition of a word, and that's part of it. A dictionary also tells you how the word is supposed to be spelled, right? And I think as educated people who don't misspell too many words, although I still misspell words. My students will correct me when I'm at the chalkboard, and I get things like the I after E except after C wrong, We're so used to it that we tend to get words right. A lot of people, will go to a dictionary back in that time to find out this word that I know orally, how the hell is it spelled, By the way, English is a bad language for that, right? Because our spelling stuff doesn't make a lot of sense. French is just as bad, There was a survey that I read back when I was in my 20s, and it was in a magazine called Lire, which is this French literary magazine. And they polled their literate readers. So they're not polling the average person on the street. They're polling people who read literature. And they're like, question number one, does French spelling make any sense? And 75% of the people said, nope, not at all, right? And then 25% were like, yeah, it's just fine. And then they asked a follow-up question, would you like to see the French language change so that the spelling makes sense? 75% of the people said, nope, don't change a damn thing. And then 25% of the people were like, yeah, we probably need to sort this out. I think if you were going to do that with English language, maybe the numbers would be a little bit different, but people tend to be pretty conservative, when it comes to messing with their language. They don't like people to change it, So long digression off of the changing of the name. Any other questions or yeah?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand like the habit and custom thing. Is that really all that different from cause and effect?
Well, different in some ways. It's saying there is no such thing as real cause and effect. It's just us putting it together, right? Now, if your understanding of cause and effect is, well, it's just a habit, then no. But that's not what most people tend to mean by causality. They want it to mean something like in the nature of the world,
Okay, but he doesn't believe in miracles, or he just doesn't think that there's a good justification.
He says,
Evidence for them.
yeah, he says, a miracle could happen. It would be a violation of the laws of nature. But why would we ever believe any account of a miracle given by somebody? Even if it happened to us, we'd probably look for, as we say, a rational explanation, right? Or a scientific explanation. And then maybe we don't have it. But if I tell you my story about the miracle that happened to me, you have to ask, well, do I trust this guy? Does he have any agenda? Is he trying to sell me something? And Hume says, we just don't have any good reason to think that anybody who does report a miracle actually witnessed a miracle, So, yeah. But, once we take, let's call it strict cause and effect, like metaphysical cause and effect, once you take that out of the picture and you say, well, it's just this loosey-goosey custom thing that people have, we could have all sorts of unexpected things happen that we could call miracles, right? It's just that why would we accept the testimony of anybody about them? And Hume says, in most cases, we wouldn't. There could be a case where there's some absolutely incontrovertible thing that we all see happen, and we're like, holy crap, it's a miracle. And then Hume says, great, show me one of those. And there aren't any, at this point in time. But he doesn't rule it out a priori. He just says, we just don't get that sort of thing. Did you have your hand up?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Who influenced his works, either among his contemporaries, whether it is from Europe or prior to his time?
Yeah, so Cicero, as we mentioned, massive influence on him. He is within the empiricist current, so he's read John Locke, he's read Thomas Hobbes. He's, Bishop Butler, who I mentioned, is somebody who Hume influences and is also influenced by Hume. The influence on Adam Smith goes both ways. He's also engaged with figures outside of Great Britain. He's part. You could say he's part of an intellectual milieu. So it's less this one single person in it influenced him, and more So take the notion of freedom or liberty, right? Hume thinks that's really important, and part of his history is that human beings are moving towards more and more liberty in baby steps here and there. There's a whole bunch of people saying similar things. There's no one single one who Hume is like, I got this idea from this guy, and that's what I'm going to run with. There's a lot of ideas that are, you could say, in the air, in some respects, part of what we like about him is that he's not emerging from a pure vacuum, but he is an original thinker, sort of like Thomas Hobbes or René Descartes. They definitely have people who influence them, but for the most part, they're kind of doing their own thing with it. Even Cicero, Hume is reinterpreting what Cicero is doing to suit his own projects and ends. Well, let's talk about Hume's influence then. So in his own time, like I mentioned, not that important as a philosopher, more important as a literary figure and as a historian. And his history gets praised and criticized by lots of different people. Some pretty extreme positions on that. Thomas Jefferson says that his writings are poison, and it would spread universal Toryism, meaning like conservatism, throughout the land. But Samuel Johnson, liked Hume quite a bit. He actually says that Hume doesn't have any principles. He's a Hobbist, meaning a follower of Thomas Hobbes. Hume himself said, I'm not a Whig oratory. Those were the big parties at the time. He said that my views are more conformable to Whig principles, my representations of persons to Tory prejudices. So he's kind of finding a middle ground, not identifying with either party. And in his own time, his political and economic ideas are pretty important, but we don't really read him for that too much anymore. You could say by the mid-19th century that part of it is gone. But his philosophical importance, he is considered like, when they do these polls of professional philosophers, who is the most important philosophical writer? David Hume is always in the top 10 because he contributed so massively, perhaps wrongly, but massively to metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, aesthetics, all of these sorts of things. Philosophy of religion too. I mean, people still use his arguments in the philosophy of religion, in atheist versus Christian debates on the internet. He's widely read. Immanuel Kant, who we're going to look at next year, he credits Hume for, as he says, awakening me from my dogmatic slumber. So dogmatic meaning like committed to a particular set of ideas and just kind of like going through life. Now, Kant was a university professor and he'd written books, right? And he's like, wow, when I read David Hume, I was like, there are some problems that I hadn't even thought of and I better take care of these. And so that spurs him to do his massive work afterwards as an older philosopher, writing 3 critiques: critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, critique of judgment, a whole bunch of other works as well, including some works in the philosophy of religion. So, no Kant, or no Hume, probably no Kant. And Kant is massively important within the 19th and 20th centuries. Arthur Schopenhauer, who was a Kantian of sorts, actually thought that he was like the only true follower of Kant. Schopenhauer is a pretty polarizing figure. He takes Hume's ethics of sympathy and incorporates that into his own ethics, says that Hume is the person who's got all this stuff right. Adam Smith, who we know from his very important work justifying a certain kind of capitalism, not the capitalism that we know today. Smith would be like turning over in his grave, but a wealth of nations. That's influenced by Hume's economic writings. I mean, they were friends. They chatted about these things. Smith had another book that was just as important, A Theory of Moral Sentiments. That's in line with Hume's thought as well. Edmund Husserl, one of the founders of phenomenology, uses Hume's notion of association of ideas, incorporates that into his philosophy. A.J. Ayer, who writes this very important book, Language, Truth, and Logic, one of the early logical positivists, he is essentially a Humean. And you can say that Anglo-American analytic philosophy for many decades is very much inspired by David Hume's thought, not only in terms of metaphysics and ethics, but in terms of metaphysics and epistemology, but also ethics and aesthetics. So he winds up having a massive effect. This is part of why he's considered to be such an important philosopher. And I'll mention one person you probably haven't heard of, who I'm a big fan of, this guy Lev Shestov. He was a Russian Jewish philosopher who left after the revolution, came to Paris, wrote a lot of interesting, very unsystematic works, probably the most famous of which is called Athens and Jerusalem. Unfortunately, didn't have that much influence because his only major student, Benjamin Fondin, died in the concentration camps because he also was Jewish. But Shestov is a really interesting thinker, and he takes Hume's ideas and kind of goes further with them, like the causality thing. He's like, yeah, Hume's right. we don't know anything about real cause and effect, and we never will. Doesn't mean we can't live our lives, but we don't have to buy into all this crazy philosophy stuff that the philosophers are always trying to push on us. Hume gives us a way out of that. He takes other interesting ideas from Hume, pushing that skepticism further. And, I'm going to be teaching Hume to my Marquette undergraduates in how many weeks? We're doing Descartes this week and next week. So in 2 more weeks, I'm teaching David Hume. We're not looking at this book because it's too long, but his Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Why are we teaching him? Because he's an important thinker, and he's got really interesting ideas, like does cause and effect really hold? Or is human nature the same everywhere? Or can animals think? A big question for us in the present, when some people are like, animals aren't even sentient. You hear things like that, and you're like, man, have you ever had a pet? You ever spent any time with animals? But there are philosophers who want to deny that animals have any consciousness. Hume is somebody relevant to that. So he's really quite a interesting guy to work through. So those are all the remarks that I have. I'm certainly happy to entertain any more questions. Could be historical, could be philosophical, could be seemingly trivial, because they're probably not. What else do you have for me? Yeah.
I hit a roadblock here when you talked about cause and effect.
Yeah.
And then natural law.
Oh,
So
so Hume doesn't think there are actually natural
he does
laws.
not believe in natural law.
So there's 2 different understandings of natural law.
Okay.
One is an ethical one,
Yeah.
where we have like certain impulses implanted in us by nature, by the kind of creatures that we are, and then we reason about that. And Hume is not part of that tradition of, it's going to turn off, of the natural law thing that goes back to the Stoics and then goes through the medievals. And then there's natural law in the sense of like physical law,
Okay,
right?
so I'm thinking more in terms of the physical.
Yeah,
And I get the point that say, okay, if I drop my pen,
Yeah.
it's the floor.
Mhm.
Okay, that's an observation.
yeah.
And you could argue that, well,
I mean, and every time you do it, it's going to hit the floor,
it's going to hit the
right?
floor.
Yeah.
At what point do you say, you've done enough observations to say, hey, yeah, that's going to hold all the time?
Yeah, so Hume says you have done enough to have the belief, the conviction, the custom, the habit to expect that it's going to do that, but you never do know. You never know, like, with a totally a priori, the universe must be this way. He says you just never get that. Because how would you get that from experience, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is where Kant actually says Hume actually was on the right track, but he didn't go deep enough. I'm going to go deeper, and I'm going to say that cause and effect isn't out there in things. It's in the way our minds project order onto the universe that we experience. We can't not see things that way. And he thinks that this is different than Hume just saying, it's association of ideas, but maybe it isn't.
Yeah, well, again, you get the point of saying,
Yeah.
in a different universe, yes, things would be different. And this comes through with with Einstein saying that you can never get to the speed of light. However, in an alternate universe, in a different type of universe, which we
If it had different ways of things, yeah. Or like, what if gravity operated according to an inverse cube law instead of an inverse square law? I mean, if it did, we'd be screwed, But different things would happen, yeah. Hume just thinks that we human beings, we can't, we can imagine that all we want, right? And we can do thought experiments, but we can never accumulate enough observations, experiments, experiences to actually say what the hell is actually going on. We can get deeper and deeper and deeper, right? With our
that kind of intersects with the thought of a miracle.
yeah,
If I drop my pen 99 times, 100 times, and 99 times it hits the floor,
yeah.
but that 1 out of 100 it doesn't. Hey, that might be a miracle.
It might be, but what Hume would do, he'd be like, okay, so what's different in this situation? Was it like a puff of air that held it up? Is there a string? He'd start looking for the most likely explanations rather than being like, obviously God made it happen. Right? Now, there's certain things where you could be like, but isn't that exactly the sort of thing you'd expect God to do? Right? If you think about like the classical biblical miracles, and we'll just take the ones that in the New Testament Jesus performs according to all the gospel stories, right? So like, it's interesting too because the way that they're like set up narratively. Think about the water to wine thing at Cana, right? You don't get Jesus saying, first his mom wants him to fix things, right? She doesn't say, do a miracle. She just says, hey, they're out of wine, do something, And he's like, it's not my time, and then she's like, I'm your mom, you're going to do it, right? Now he doesn't like say, okay, please bring up these jars of water. Everybody look inside. Do you see that it's water? Ooh, hey, presto, boom, it's wine. He just says, hey, did you look over there? And they're like, well, that's water over there. And he's like, better check again, I mean, I'm roughly paraphrasing, right? And maybe in a facetious way. But, if something like that happened, you could be like, well, maybe I did misplace the wine. Maybe somebody carted it in. Those are other possible explanations, right?
The most intriguing miracle along those lines to me is the causing the blind man to see.
Oh, yeah,
because the blind man's been blind from birth. So how did he
that's a good one.
Be able to understand, well, red is red. This is dirt. This is, because these are all things that are on us as we grow.
That's an interesting one. That's something that Hume actually, not that miracle, but the idea of a blind person having sight restored to him. Hume actually thinks that they wouldn't be able to make sense of that information. And I think we probably would say, at least at first, they're not going to know what the hell they're looking at, right? Maybe over time, as they have experiences, they can start to grasp color, just like deaf people who have hearing restored.
Hearing impaired or deaf people, yes.
Yeah, I mean, now, understood as a miracle, I mean, in the story, what does he do? He's like, I think, if I remember right, he like rubs spittle on the guy's eye, and so you can be like, well, every time I do that, it doesn't cure a blind guy, right? A lot of blind guys let me go up to him and spit in my fingers and rub it on them. It must be a miracle. Hume would be like, well, maybe there's some medicinal properties in the spittle. But the other part, like you mentioned, he actually processes visual information. Yeah, I think Hume would have a hard time explaining that one.
Yeah, right.
But he'd also say, how do you know that actually happened, Would the apostles have had any reason to, like, embellish stories? We don't know, That's basically his point there. Yeah.
Do you think, I kind of never studied this subject, but I'm struck by the fact that he's within the top 10. Wow. Do you think his value was most as a philosopher or as a provocateur? The thought of others around.
So
like other philosophers,
Yeah. So let me rephrase it. Is his value in his own philosophical ideas, like understood as being the right way to look at things and systematically interpreting the world, or as a disruptor, somebody who, like you said, provokes others to go beyond him?
Or to think different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, personally, because I actually think Hume is wrong, I don't think that he got like the whole system of how things are correct. And I think there's some serious problems, some contradictions in his work. I'm not going to say that his point of view is valuable primarily because he got things right, because I think he's wrong. So I would say personally that, like, if you can get a Immanuel Kant to take you seriously and say, I'm going to write books in response to this guy, that's pretty important, right? And there's plenty of other people who are like, this Hume guy, he's awful, Well, you got to write a book.
It's kind of provoking them to think.
Yeah.
Their line of thinking.
Yeah.
You don't have to put a value judgment on what he says. He's a disruptor.
Yeah. I will say this, though. there's something about the way that he puts his thoughts together that even though I don't accept them, I find them attractive. And I do this as well with Immanuel Kant and with René Descartes and with other philosophers. And that's probably why I'm still in the philosophy business, because otherwise you get people in the philosophy business who are like, I want the one true philosophy, and if I can't have that, it's all crap. Or they're like, I've found it. It's this guy here, or this woman here, and I'm just going to be like preaching their gospel the rest of my career. I'm a different kind of person. And I think Hume was in a certain way too. He could appreciate Cicero without thinking Cicero was correct, and learn from him. So I like reading and teaching these people, even though I think that they've got some stuff wrong. And maybe part of it is because of the provocative idea, like, well, what if animals really do think? How do we treat them then? I mean, factory farming, which is already pretty horrific, even if they're just meat machines, really has to go out the window if
Maybe it was the value in the questions he asked.
That's part of it, yeah. Well, you don't get one without the other, though. The questions by themselves are just questions, and
but if he puts the question out there, then you got a lot of audience to have different answers.
Yeah, but what's really important is providing answers, and then not just providing answers, but providing reasons for the answers that, so the process of inquiry. Questions are what we begin with. They're not what we end with, In most things. In almost, philosophy is probably more willing to entertain questions than most disciplines are, academically. Most of them want you to know what the answer is and how to find the answer. Philosophy is one of the places where we get to ask more questions, And in life, most people are pretty impatient with questions, you find, They really they don't even want answers. They just want a procedure for how things are going to happen, So, yeah, philosophy is probably more open to that. But it can't just be asking questions, because then people are right that we're just kind of bullshitting around, which is the common complaint about philosophers. We never get anything done. So, Hume did. He got a whole book done, and some other books. But you can say, well, what if the book is wrong? Well, I don't know how much of an achievement it is then, So, any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, is there a connection between Hume and the utilitarian?
Oh, yes, very much so. So utilitarianism officially is this movement that begins with Jeremy Bentham, right? And then John Stuart Mill is like the next generation, very important thinkers in the 19th century. Hume is a big influence on Bentham, and Hume uses the idea of utility, which a lot of other people were using at the time. Adam Smith, the French encyclopedists, they're all appealing to this idea of usefulness or utility and measuring it. Hume doesn't go as far as Bentham does in terms of systematizing that, but yeah, Bentham is really, in a lot of respects, influenced by Hume. So I don't know how I left that out, but I'm glad you asked, because that is one of the big influences that he had on the world of ideas. And if anybody who doesn't know about utilitarianism, it was a massive philosophical movement that is still prevalent today in professional ethics. Like if you're doing business ethics, utilitarianism is one of the main approaches. Medical ethics, people don't like it because, it has this tendency of like leading to, well, what if we harvest this? I'll give you a case. This is from the famous trolley problem discussions. So the original trolley problem is not the trolley going down the tracks and you have a switch that you can pull and it's going to hit 5 people. If you don't pull the switch, it runs over them. Otherwise, it runs over one. That's only part of it, and that's a later modification. The original trolley problem is this. So you got a trolley, you're actually in charge of it. It's going to hit 5 people. You can divert it onto another set of tracks. It'll kill 1 person. Would that be okay? Most people will say, yeah, that's okay to do, because you're saving 5 people at the expense of 1. It sucks that you have to do it, but yeah, that's the right thing to do. That's a utilitarian way of looking at it, right? And then there's another similar case where people they're not as happy about 5 versus 1. All right, so the other case is called operation. And there's a doctor, and he's got very much control over his ward, right? So it's not like modern medicine. And he's got 5 sick patients, each of whom are terminally ill, and each of them has an organ that has to be replaced or they're going to die. So one needs a heart, 2 of them need lungs, one lung each, 2 of them need kidneys, right? And in comes another patient who just needs, I think if I remember right, it's like a flu shot or something. And he's like, well, your organs are really nice, you're in good shape. And he's like, he doesn't even ask the guy. He's like, let me give you a shot, some pep pills, right? And he tranquilizes him, and then he wheels him in back, and then he harvests him, killing the guy in the process, right? And one kidney to this person, 1 kidney. Now he's saving 5 people's lives, right? That's good, isn't it? These people would die otherwise, but at the expense of the 1. Now, most people would say that's not okay, right? And so here's the original trolley question. Why is it okay to divert the trolley, but it's not okay to cut somebody up for their organs and stick them in other people? That's kind of a weird quandary. And I mean, the original writer of it, maybe she's overestimating how many people say no in this case and yes in this case. But that's where it came in. And that's all utilitarian reasoning. A strict utilitarian would say, hey, they're the same case. There's no difference. Saving 5, saving 1. You got to choose one or the other. It's a no-brainer, right? So in medical ethics, they don't like utilitarianism too much, even though medical decisions are often made on utilitarian bases because we try to, make everything cost-effective, right? The hospital administrators love utilitarianism because it helps them keep the hospital going. But doctors usually don't like it so much. But yeah, it's a really important, not just philosophical movement, but it has massive real-world effects. What often gets called effective altruism comes out of utilitarianism. It's a movement that's been tarnished a bit because some of the people involved with it have stolen money and done things they weren't supposed to do, but that's because they weren't good utilitarians. They weren't living up to their own stuff. And to come back to the question, yeah, David Hume he's influential on it. He never formulates utilitarianism as such, but he thinks utility is something that plays a role in beauty, the usefulness of things, and in justice. So yeah, good question. Any other questions, or we still have a little bit of time before they kick us out? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm interested how long you've been teaching Hume in a college setting.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the first class that I taught him in, it wasn't like an intro class, it was a philosophy of politics, law, and justice class, because he had ideas about the social contract. And so I taught a little bit of him in that class. Actually, as a TA, teaching assistant, before I started teaching my own classes, in an intro class, we had to cover Hume. But that was, like the professor would teach, and then we would have our small group sessions. So you're kind of like doing apprenticing. And so more than 20 years, I'd be hard-pressed to say exactly how many. I mean...
Have your views changed over time?
I never thought he was right about a lot of things. But it's not that my views have changed. Like, the is he right or is he wrong? It's more like I've developed greater appreciation over time. And part of that is just personal change. Like, I was rather impatient with philosophers that I thought were wrong, right? Why would you want to spend time on them? And then I'd be like, well, it's kind of fun to read his works. There's even if he's wrong about stuff, he makes interesting arguments. And, going back to so my students, I tell them in all my classes, you don't have to believe any of this stuff. You just have to understand it well enough to be able to talk about it competently on papers and tests, right? Understanding, very different than agreement or appreciation. I tell them, you don't even have to appreciate it. You don't have to like these people. You just have to know what they say. Because then I've got them, right? I planted a seed, and that can grow. Because I know for me, man, there's so many thinkers that when I was an undergraduate, I thought they were stupid. I couldn't, see why anyone liked them, like Aristotle, for example. But then after a while, I came to realize that it wasn't Aristotle that there was a problem with. It was I was wrong, and there were roadblocks to me appreciating him, right? And so I think with my students, I don't expect them, especially because they're not majors, right? They're all other things. I just want to put a couple seeds in their head that maybe later on will germinate, But you never know what that's going to lead to,
I can see a lot of people not liking the lack of cause and effect thing.
Yeah.
That kind of goes against the push for, producing scientific results. That was in when I was studying psychology, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was not much anymore about Freud, and more so just results and this stuff.
Yeah. You can have a Humean point of view. There were philosophers of science who adopted Hume's point of view, and you can still do science. You just, you don't say that you've ever determined anything once and for all, right? So you can say, well, 99% of the time that we do this turns out this way. And in psychology, that's pretty damn good, right? Because, psychology experiments are all over the map compared to physics, where, we drop the pen, it better fall each time, right? You can have a Humean point of view, what we call the positivists. Ernst Mach, in physics, A.J. Ayer in philosophy. They used a Humean perspective, and they were fine with it. But when you tell people, the causality thing, when you suggest to them that once we get beyond the realm of our experience, we don't really know anything, they don't like that, because that means we can't know anything about God, or about whether we have a soul or not, or all these other big things that people are very invested in, right? So, yeah. Hume is still viewed as one of the bad guys by a lot of people in the present, because of these views that he's got. So, any other questions? Yeah.
How does the interpretation of its ideas evolve with time, since you have been doing it for 20 years?
Oh, of teaching, you mean? Or?
Society has changed drastically over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And the interpretation, sometimes it's relevant to the time. So how does it...
Well, that's interesting. I can say that pretty much all the people who I typically teach remain relevant throughout my lifetime, and will probably remain relevant after I'm gone. But the examples that we use change considerably, right? Because when all of us were younger, we can remember a time where there was no social media, for example. Whereas these students who are 18 right now, that's their environment. They've never lived in a time where we weren't connected with each other through the internet in all these myriad ways that we can access on mobile technology. So I'll use examples like, how do you know how your iPhone actually works? Or Android or whatever else you got, right? I don't want to be prejudiced against non-iPhone users. I just happen to have an iPhone. So we come up with examples that fit the time. It's interesting too that you bring that up. So I used the word Spock earlier, right? And I think everybody knows who I'm talking about. The first officer of the Enterprise in the original Star Trek series. You can't use references to Spock with 18-year-olds because they have no clue who the hell you're talking about. You couldn't even use them 10 years ago. They didn't know who you're talking about, right? Because Star Trek for them is Picard and Lower Decks and that new show that they've got out that I can't remember offhand. It's not Enterprise, it's another one, right? And they may not have any interest in it because our society, when it comes to like viewing, there's a million options, right? Whereas back when we were young, you had your channels on the TV, then you got cable, but everybody was still watching the same shows, right? So you have to modify the examples that you're using, but the basic ideas. I haven't found anybody who I've taught who I was like, well, now they're no longer relevant. That I can remember. I might be wrong about that. But Hume certainly remains very relevant, maybe even more in some respects, like the animal issue, I think, in our time.
On the value aspect, and then on the interpretation aspect.
Oh, I hope my interpretation has gotten better and more accurate. But you never know. You would need like an outside observer, somebody else who knows Hume, to watch you teach and interact with students and say, no, you're getting Hume wrong, right? It's very hard to be a good assessor of your own capacities that way, right? Do you want to chime in about that, Andy? Because, you've got a background in faculty development,
You are less rigid
Oh.
in your response to the question. I think that to your earlier point about the impatience that you had with philosophers, I think that you had a certain amount of impatience with, not a negative impatience, but certainly sort of a practiced impatience with the questions that people would pose.
Okay.
I think the fact that you do so much more public philosophy work, not just classroom teaching, but public philosophy work. Because I see this most in the AMAs or the sessions that you host where like anybody can chime in about anything.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that you have developed a capacity for kind of suffering, off topic or inaccurate readings, but you're far more generous with it than you used to be. And I think you try to build connections for people who are clearly lacking either framework or capacity or foundation.
Yeah.
To help bring them to at least a little bit better of an understanding. So you have the ability to talk to people who are well versed in something at a higher level, but I think you're also doing a better job over the past 10 years of getting more people to connect with topics where they may be grossly, misunderstanding it or really far apart from it.
I think with academic students, one of the things that, to go to your question, that made a difference for me was realizing that we only get a few chances to, I talked about planting seeds, to ever reach them, right? Because in our society, we don't generally have people study philosophy. If you're really, really lucky, you might get it in high school as an English elective or social studies elective or religion elective, but it might be poorly taught, as it was for me when I was a kid. Whereas in other countries, that's part of the curriculum, right? So we get them at Marquette for one class, and that's it. Used to be they had to take 2 classes, philosophy of human nature and ethics, and they got rid of the ethics requirement. And now it's just this one thing called Foundations of Philosophy, which is an intro class. So this is the one chance that I have to get the business majors and nursing majors and psychology majors and pick whatever, pre-law, pre-med, all these kids who are go-getter professionals to read some philosophical literature and take stuff seriously. Getting them to actually ask questions is tricky with this generation. They're often very passive compared to us, I think, right? I've come to realize that if I shut them down, what message does that send? Philosophers are jerks. Why would I want to study this crap? It's not worth my time. If I say, let's take that idea and see what we can do with it over here. I mean, it shows the person that I'm taking their ideas seriously, which makes them feel hopefully good, not anxious or something. What's he going to do with my ideas? And then maybe they get something out of it, and then they, instead of going back to the dorm and saying, oh, this prick, my professor, he humiliated me in front of the class. They're like, hey, I'm taking this class and It's actually pretty good. I still don't understand David Hume, but I think I want to read him a bit more, or something like that, or Aristotle, or Mary Wollstonecraft, or whoever, right? Well, any final questions, or?
And one thing.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm biased, right? I mean,
I hope so.
And we work together on a lot of things. So I have opinions about Greg that I can say very freely. But I think the thing is that you also have been able to connect curiosity. It's not just Marquette students, it's the Maya students.
Yeah.
And the ability to build that idea of challenging and creating analogs. It's almost like what you see in really good design thinking, where you help the student or the new person or even the expert find an analog for a tricky topic so that they can trouble with it in ways that they can connect with and relate to and understand. So
okay.
I think that's an important distinction.
I think analogies and examples are really, really important in teaching, not just philosophy, but most things. Because most of us get things by saying, oh, it's sort of like this, right? So I think that's good pedagogy. Any other questions, though? Or?
Just to go back to your point about longevity and aging.
Oh, yeah.
So Bill was in a class called Aging Mastery, which is senior centers have had.
Okay.
And so this was like pre-COVID, like 7 years ago. He was one of the youngest ones in the class. It didn't matter.
I was going to say, yeah.
And so there's different sections. Your health, like medicine, when you talk to your doctor. And I think, I don't know, forgive me, this is here we'll have to bring up next time. What was the question? But his answer was having curiosity and how that can lead to a healthy, long life. And you are just epitome of it. Because as long as we've known you, and he knew you longer, about teaching philosophy to the prison establishment. And students. And now the public. And the YouTube, which is all over the world. I mean, it's just stellar. It's just...
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there is one thing that I do suffer, not just professionally, but also in terms of like getting things done, because I am broadly curious. You do better if you specialize, like just be a Hume scholar, right? Because then you can like totally get through all of his works, but I'm like scattered over a bunch of different things, which is good because then I can like draw connections. But you always feel like, I don't have enough time, to really get to the bottom of this or that. So it's a trade-off, and there's no solution to that problem. There's an old thing. So we'll end on this. There's this old metaphor. I think Isaiah Berlin came up with it, called the hedgehog and the fox. Are you familiar with this one? The hedgehog, they basically just stay in one place, and they do what they do really, really well, but they don't see the rest of the world. The fox wanders all over the place. They don't have like a settled abode, but they get to see an awful lot of stuff. I'm a fox. I'm not a hedgehog, And you kind of have to pick one or the other. And you can't be both at the same time, I think. So it's probably a matter of temperament or something like that more than anything else. But there are a lot of hedgehogs in philosophy who are really, really good at what they do, but they only have like this little area of expertise. So
Thank you very much.
you're very welcome, yeah. And it's the same way like in medicine, right? I mean, any other discipline, you can only do so much. So you're welcome. Yeah, thanks for coming.